So, and we'll talk about like because Kid Cudi was one guy who did testify.
Huge witness.
Yeah. So, and we'll get there. That was, I think, like a couple weeks into the trial. But maybe at the start, there were 5 final counts on the final indictment that came down. And I believe, if I remember correctly, along the way, they threw out 3 counts. They threw out like kidnapping. Am I remembering this correctly?
So let me clarify. If I can, let me set the charges. I think it's really important.
That's why you're here, Jesse.
Here we go. There were 5 charges that he went to trial with. Now, when he originally was indicted, I think there were only 3. They upped it to 5. But it really, what you're dealing with is this: racketeering conspiracy, which I'll explain in a minute, 2 counts of trafficking. So one was with respect to Cassie Ventura Fine. The other was with respect to Jane, who was an unidentified victim. And then 2 counts, and these are the ones he was convicted of: transportation to engage in prostitution. We call it the Mann Act violations. I've said from the beginning of this case, those are the easiest charges to convict him of. And I think within a few days of the trial, I was convinced he was going to be convicted.
Yes.
Okay, because literally all they had to prove was, did he transport men? They didn't even have to prove it was sex workers, men across state lines, and Jane and Cassie, for the purposes of sex work. That's it. And when you look at the travel receipts, you look at the messages from Sean Combs himself, the testimony of his assistants, even voice notes from Sean Combs, it was so clear that he was involved in all of this. He was involved in transporting them, getting them paid, all of it. Very simple. Everybody knew he was going to get convicted.
They had voice notes in Discovery that was played for the jury?
Oh, yeah. Like where he was basically directing about how they get paid.
Come across that.
It was a clear-cut case. I don't know for sure, but I imagine the jury probably decided that very early on. Now, put those to the side. The complicated charges were the ones he was ultimately acquitted of. Okay, let's start with racketeering conspiracy, because one of the big questions that we got throughout the trial for 8 weeks was, what is RICO? Like, what are we talking about? Traditionally, when we talk about racketeering or RICO or RICO conspiracy, is the mob, okay? So it's simple. There's a mob boss. You have the officers. They're all trying to benefit the family. They're doing all this criminal activity to benefit the family. Drug trafficking, murder.
Oh, we don't do drugs.
Okay, yeah. Well,
No
you keep
drugs.
it in a certain
right.
area. You keep it in a certain area. I don't want it near schools.
I don't want it sold to children.
Yeah.
That's an infamity.
It's good.
I'm not going to go to the other line because that's kind of racist. But
Yeah.
we'll cut it.
Money laundering, gambling, all of that. All of these underlying crimes to benefit the family, to benefit a criminal enterprise. That's essentially what it's been used for in the past. This was a little different. You're not charging all the members of the mafia. You're charging one person, Sean Combs, with racketeering conspiracy. The theory is that he operated a criminal enterprise for years, that he used his assistants, his bodyguards, his staff to engage in a pattern of abusing women, manipulating women, exploiting women to benefit himself. And if he benefits, if he's getting his sexual desires fulfilled, it benefits everybody else. The businesses are doing well, he's doing it. So all of these assistants, all of his underlings were basically engaging in a pattern of crimes and covering them up. Now, in order to prove racketeering conspiracy, there are 2 parts. One, as I said, you have to establish there was a criminal enterprise. You have to establish conspiracy. That means that there was an agreement, that he and at least one other co-conspirator agreed to do this together, agreed to engage in a pattern of illegal activity. If you move past, if the jury accepts that there was a criminal enterprise and there was a criminal agreement, then you move on to the second half. And I believe that first half was the problem. I don't think the jury ever accepted that he was the leader of this criminal enterprise. What I do think that they figured out, and this was easy, once you establish there's a criminal enterprise, there's a criminal agreement, the second part is the prosecution has to prove at least 2 underlying crimes: kidnapping, arson, sex trafficking, drug distribution, obstruction, okay? Arson. They only had to prove 2. The reason you thought that they dropped some charges is a misnomer. It was a
misnomer.
It was misinformation, and it's not your fault. It was bad reporting on it. On the eve of going into, I think it was closing arguments, at least going into closing arguments, there was reporting, prosecution's dropping kidnapping and arson. Oh my gosh, their case is weak. That wasn't what happened. For each of those underlying crimes, there were different theories. the jury could say, I think Sean Combs engaged in kidnapping. I think that's one of the underlying crimes. No. Or I think he engaged in aiding and abetting kidnapping or attempted kidnapping. There were all of these underlying theories for each one of those crimes. So if they said, I think he engaged in conspiracy to commit kidnapping, but I don't think he actually committed kidnapping himself. Or I think he committed kidnapping, but I don't really think he engaged in aiding and abetting kidnapping. It's very complicated. So what did the prosecution do? They just removed a couple of the theories for kidnapping and arson. They removed, I think it was attempted kidnapping and arson, but they didn't remove kidnapping and arson. They said, no, he committed these crimes, or he engaged in conspiracy to commit kidnapping and arson, or aiding and abetting kidnapping and arson. So there was misnomers. A lot of people thought that those kidnapping and arson were removed from the racketeering count. It wasn't the case. So the jury had a big task. I think they spent a lot of time on this. A, did he engage in a criminal enterprise, a criminal agreement, and were there at least two underlying crimes that the prosecution proved? 90% of the case was about racketeering conspiracy. Sex trafficking. What's sex trafficking? It's not like Taken. It's not always like Taken,
right,
where you have a shadowy organization that kidnaps young girls, ships them out. That is an easily digestible and explainable sex trafficking concept. Here, what they were saying is it was sex trafficking of his girlfriends, that he used force, fraud, or coercion to transport them across state lines for the purposes of commercial sex work, that he was forcing them.
Commercial sex work.
Right, meaning that they were, meaning that he was forcing them to engage in sex acts with prostitutes or male performers by using force, fraud, or coercion. Force is easy to understand. He was using physical violence or threats of physical violence. Or he was maintaining control over them, maintaining control over their careers, their finances, that pressure, that power dynamic. Maybe he was using fraud. He was lying about the relationship. He was lying about certain things to get what he wanted. Now, I will tell you, there were certain aspects of this case where I think the prosecution checked off a number of those boxes. But clearly, they didn't prove it beyond a reasonable doubt. There's a difference between checking them out. I get how they're doing it, and I can list out some of them where I think, for each one of them, I actually thought that I thought it was 50-50 if he was going to get convicted of racketeering conspiracy for what I said. But I did believe that there was a strong chance he was going to get convicted of sex trafficking of Cassie. There were 3 incidents, in my opinion, that were demonstrated that.
Was one of them the infamous video that shows him just beating the shit out of her?
Why? That's how the prosecution started their case.
Yes, they literally played the video on the opening argument.
That's what they got to do. That's what they have to do. Opening statement. Why did they show it? It wasn't just him beating her. He's not charged with domestic violence. He's not charged with assault. She claims that this happened at the LA Intercontinental Hotel. Okay, so first of all, sex trafficking. It's one of the many locations that she was transported to have sex with male prostitutes. Okay, so you travel element done. She claims she was leaving a freak off. Okay, a freak off is this, experience with a male prostitute. So now you have the commercial sex element. He goes on that tape, he beats her, and he drags her back in the direction of the room.
That's right.
That checked off for me all of the elements of sex trafficking. Okay? Jury didn't believe it. Another one, and this one I don't think was talked about nearly enough. Okay? She claims that she was on a plane with Sean Combs, okay? And they're coming back, I think, from Cannes. He sits next to her. He shows her a video that he recorded of her engaging in sex acts, threatened to release them. So now you have a travel component, you have a threat component. They land, he demands a freak off, he gets a freak off. Travel, threat, right, coercion, and commercial sex act. That's another check right there. And by the way, I have to tell you, before the jury came back with their verdict, and by the way, there was another, Daniel Phillip, who was one of the male performers. He testified that he observed Sean Combs, at least heard him slapping her, dragging her.
Wasn't he like the first witness
one of the first witnesses.
Like they had like the security guard and him that day one.
Right.
Almost.
So those 3 episodes, before they even went into deliberations, I said to myself and I said to the viewers, there's a strong chance he'll be convicted of sex trafficking because the prosecution was key. They said, you only need to find 1 episode of sex trafficking. That's it. Yes, he had a lot of sexual encounters with Cassie Ventura, fine. Not saying all of them were sex trafficking. We're not saying that. A lot of it was consensual. Just need to find one episode. There were, at least for me, 3 that they could have found. Right before the jury came back with their verdict, and let's talk about what happened. Right before they came back with their verdict, they said, can we get a readback of the testimony of those 3 episodes? And then a few hours later, they come back with that. Remember what happened? They said, we have come to a verdict on sex trafficking and transportation to engage in prostitution. We're hung right now on racketeering conspiracy. I went on air and I said, I know they've convicted him of transportation to engage in prostitution. I believe that they've convicted him of Cassie. Why would they ask for a readback of all those 3 specific episodes and then come back with a verdict?
Of Cassie's sex trafficking.
Yeah, I'm like, clearly. Yeah. Now, they didn't ask for a readback of Jane, which to me, I was like, he was found not guilty of her. Because Jane was, I think, the more problematic witness.
Did Jane testify too?
She testified.
Yeah.
She testified, but she was a problematic witness for them. I don't mean she wasn't telling the truth. Let's be clear. I don't think, I'm not even saying Cassie wasn't telling the truth. I think that what the problem is what they recounted just didn't fit into the elements of sex trafficking because of all of the text messages that came out where they were encouraging these sexual episodes. They were setting them up. They were staying in contact with him. They were talking about how much they love Sean Combs. That's the power dynamic between an alleged victim and an abuser is very complicated, but it was probably hard for the jury to say beyond a reasonable doubt, were they really sex trafficked? That becomes a question.
It gets uncomfortable to even talk about, for example, and just one of many examples you can talk about here, when you have someone like Cassie who was in a long-term relationship with him, obviously was abusive. We have that on video.
Yeah.
But she did stay in it. Now, was she coerced to stay in it? Certainly can make the argument there. And did appear to, I mean, if you look at some of the text messages and her setting stuff up, there were aspects of the relationship besides the actual abuse where she enjoyed it. So when you have someone like that then also claiming, oh, he raped me, it gets weird when you're in a relationship too. It's like, all right, well, you're not married, but how – it's not that that's impossible. That does happen, but – I'm just thinking as like a juror or something, when you're hearing that, you got to be so confused with what the semantics are.
The counter argument to that is someone can agree 9 times out of 10, the one time that they don't could be a crime.
Of
right?
course. Thank you guys for checking out this clip. If you haven't already subscribed, please subscribe and hit the like button on this video. It is a huge, huge help. And if you'd like to check out this clip's full podcast episode, that link is in the description below or right here. And finally, you can follow me on Instagram and X by using the links in my description below.